So what would you say is the editorial vision of your news service?
You know, here's the thing. We, first and foremost, want to be interesting. You know, we don't have an agenda other than being interesting and talking about things that we think are important. For instance, so by that I mean we're not algorithmically driven. You know, it's not always based on, you know, what's the most popular or what do we think is going to do the best on search. It's not like that. I mean, there's stories that we're committed to covering. It's in our DNA, and this has always been the way it is at HuffPost. You know, we know that if we do a story on Afghanistan, it's not necessarily going to be the biggest clicker, but we think it's important. We've made a commitment from our very launching that we're going to stick with, you know, covering Afghanistan as long as it's in the news, and unfortunately it's still very much in the news. So it's that kind of thing. We're very committed to talking about jobs and poverty. For instance, we just did our shadow conventions to 2012. I started working with Ariana 2000 on the first version of this, but when we decided what we were going to do on HuffPost Live, how were we going to cover the conventions, we decided we didn't want to do the same thing that everybody was doing. So we decided to talk about 3 issues that we didn't think either of the major parties were talking about. Poverty in America, the failed drug war, and the corrupting influence of money on our politics. And so these were issues that we felt strongly about, and it turns out that our community was very passionate about them as well. We got incredible levels of engagement when we were doing the Shadow Convention. People were, you know, the time spent on site, you know, really spiked up and way, way, way above the industry average. So that's what I like to say. We definitely have a vision, you know, and it's also a blend of the high and the low. It's another Huffington Post signature. You know, we're not always serious all the time. You know, we're like most people. I don't know about you, but personally, I'm very passionate about politics, but I also want to know who won the Oscars, and I want to know who won the Super Bowl, and I want to talk about that crazy commercial that I saw on TV last night. You know, so I think that this is what the HuffPost tries to do, this blend of the high and the low, you know, the serious and the fun, and that's the kind of same editorial sort of direction, if you will, that we bring to HuffPost Live.
Back in the old days, news services were considered fairly objective. There may be some that skewed a little left, some that skewed a little right, but generally speaking, you know, Huntley, Brinkley, all of that, Walter Cronkite, one felt that it was pretty much in the middle of the road. Can that exist nowadays? Do you think that news reportage needs to be one way or the other? Can a middle-of-the-road objective survive?
We're not fans of the view from nowhere. The idea that, you know, I don't have any opinions, and I'm not picking on one or anything. I know we have the, you know, the famous fair and balanced. It's not that, or the you decide. But I really think that too much of the modern media and the mainstream media tries to find this middle of the road. Well, on the one hand, well, on the other, well, the truth must lie somewhere in between, and I don't think that's the case. Very often the truth is hiding in the shadows, off on the side. So we don't, like, as I said, we're not trying to have an agenda. I believe there are many, 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 many issues that are beyond left and right. I think it's too easy to try to pigeonhole everything into that sort of, you know, prism, just look through that view. I think they try to do that too often. I mean, for instance, you know, if somebody says something traditionally about getting out of Afghanistan, suddenly that's a left position. Why is that a left position? It's not a left position. There's many people, you know, who are conservatives from George Will and on who for years have been talking about getting out of Afghanistan. So, you know, I think it's too easy to look at things that way. And I think there's a growing, I'll give you another example. The jobs crisis. Everybody, you know, can say, wait a minute, there's 20 million people who are unemployed or underemployed. This is a crisis of huge proportions here in America. Now, we may disagree about the role of government in, you know, taking care of that crisis, but no one, you know, it's beyond left and right to agree that something needs to be done. So why don't we find, you know, the mutual ground where we find agreement and try to work it out together instead of this, you know, I'll go to my corner and preach to my choir, you'll go to your corner and preach to your choir. I don't think that's very constructive.
Do you think that it's possible within your framework to get the two sides to talk, or is it still a case of I'm commenting from this side, I'm commenting from that side, or do you try to bridge it?
Yeah, we are very much committed to non-toxic conversations that are solution-oriented. You know, it's easy to point fingers, and sure, there's, especially in a campaign season, there's a lot of that going on. But we're trying to not just do that. We want to really actually have, you know, conversations that try to figure out ways where we could get people talking And as I said before, talking with each other, not at each other. So this is not just about the media not talking at the viewers. It's also each other, the community not talking at each other, but actually listening. And that's one of the things we do. We have room to breathe in our segments. Our segments last 15, 20, 25 minutes, 30 minutes. 35 minutes. As long as the conversation is interesting, we'll continue to have that. And we've really found more and more people who've come on who have traditionally done traditional TV shows or cable shows, and they come off and they go, "Wow, that was a lot different. I didn't feel like I had to rush everything in the first 5 minutes because we don't have hard outs. We don't have commercials where we go, oh, I'm sorry, that's interesting, but we don't have any time left. We have time left as long as it's interesting." So by letting it breathe, by letting everybody have their say, it kind of lowers the volume, if you will, where people are not just trying to get their little soundbite in, but are actually able to listen to each other and respond.
So if you're not limited by commercial breaks and all, what is your business model?
Well, we do have, sponsors, and we interweave them into the show, hopefully in an organic manner. The business model is really twofold. Take that. So the business model is actually twofold. On the one hand, we do have live integrations for our sponsors. We have a bumper at the beginning when you sign on for the first time that day. But we also take the full segments and we cut them into clips. And those clips become video on demand, which is traditionally how people experience video, both on the web and on their mobile devices. So we have pre-roll, traditional kind of way of monetizing video on the web and on mobile. And so it's both of those things. It's sort of looking forward to new ways and trying to be innovative and trying to work with brands to find interesting ways to have them be involved in our programming, like I said, in an organic way, in a true way, in an authentic way, because I think that's really very, very important online, the authenticity. And then also, traditional models of, scale, scope, and pre-roll.
So how would you handle a news story from one of your sponsors?
A news story about?
About one of your sponsors.
We are very much an editorial and journalistic operation. This is how Huffington Post has always operated. Separation of church and state, the Chinese wall. And if there's a news story that is, an important piece of news or an interesting piece of news or a piece of news that people are talking about and it involves one of our sponsors, then, we'll cover it. And the chips will fall where they may, as it is. At the end of the day, we would very much like to be a business that works and that makes profit and that everybody is happy. That's the environment that we exist in. We're not a nonprofit. We're a for-profit organization. But at the same time, our editorial and our journalistic side is really what's dominant.